Hello, colleagues, and welcome to week 0 of SAP Cloud Platform Version Control with Git. My name is Arnaldo Cavazos, and I will be your instructor for the duration of this course. This week is going to be a simple introductory week in order to get you set up for taking the course. In this unit, Unit 1, I'll tell you the story of how this course was created. In Unit 2, I'll explain the target audience of the course, and I'll also give you an outline of what the course will and will not cover. In Unit 3, I'll give you a big picture view of Git topics. One of the first things people get confused about regarding Git is what the term Git means. People start by asking questions like, is Git the same thing as GitHub? Is the SAP Web IDE offering its own version of Git? What about people who use Git with the command line, and what does that have to do with Linux, and what does that have to do with Gerrit? All these questions will be answered in that unit. Now, this is not a theoretical class. It's very hands-on. Your main method of learning will be to follow along with me as we perform a lot of hands-on examples. So in Unit 4, I will show you how to get started with a free GitHub account and a free SAP Cloud Platform account so that you can perform all the practical examples along with me in order to learn from this course. Now, I'd like to start by telling you a brief story about the origin of this course. About 4 years ago, I worked alongside a software team that was using JavaScript to build a new front-end web interface for an old business application. And even though they were new to JavaScript, the team mastered it quickly and the developers were able to code a really slick user interface. But there was one problem. In addition to the team being new to JavaScript, the team was also new to the version control system being used, which was Git. Now, each of them had years of experience using other version control systems. So it seemed that Git shouldn't be a problem for them to easily master, except for the fact that it was a problem. Over the course of a few months, I watched the team of bright developers consistently struggle, not with the software they were developing, but with the version control system. Sometimes they found Git so difficult to use, they would independently create the same features in order to avoid having to integrate their work. Of course, eventually they did wind up having to integrate their work, and this would often result in sessions that went late in the evening. Git was more of a roadblock to development than an enabler of best practices. A couple of years after that, I started working on another team that was developing new features using SAP's UI5 technology using SAP Web IDE. I and most of the team was new to UI5, and we were also new to Git. At the beginning of the project, we had a few weeks allocated to learn the new technology, but I remembered that other team from years back, and so while the rest of the team focused on learning UI5, I decided to spend the first couple of days learning Git. My goal was to learn Git for a day or two, and then train the rest of the team so that Git wasn't a problem for us. Learning Git was a lot more of a challenge than I thought it would be. There was no course available and very little documentation that taught people how to use Git using Web IDE. What I wound up doing was creating my own course and then training the rest of my team to use Web IDE Git. The result was not just that we didn't have problems with Git anymore. Git actually became a powerful tool that we could leverage rather than a difficult problem to be avoided. So when this was done, as an afterthought, since I work for SAP, I contacted SAP University and told them that I had created a short class in Web IDE Git, and I'd be happy to teach it to people if anyone was interested. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. It turned out that there was a lot of other teams who struggled to understand Git. Over time, I began to have sort of a side job of training other teams from around the world in Web IDE Git. Every time I taught colleagues, I incorporated their feedback into the course in order to improve it. I also was really surprised to learn that the experience of the team that I had witnessed 4 years ago was not unique. Far from it. Midway through the class, people would come to me in private and kind of confess to me that their team spent half their development time fighting with Git. Now, while I've met many colleagues who are truly Git experts, they've mastered the tool, sometimes because they've used Git on previous development projects, I've met many others, really brilliant developers, who found Git to be complex and confusing, and still others who knew some aspects of Git but avoided some important features because they didn't really understand them. The most gratifying thing about training people who use SAP Web IDE Git was the emails I would receive later from around the world, telling me that their entire team was far more productive because Git was no longer a roadblock, but was an enabler. So I've had the privilege of teaching Web IDE Git to a lot of people over the past 2 years, and I'm now excited to teach it to you. Around the time I was teaching this course to various colleagues, I had a friend go through a personal tragedy, and so I was thinking a lot in the back of my head about what's called the Kubler-Ross model of the stages of grief. Perhaps you're familiar with it. The stages are denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance. So the idea is if, for example, your pet dog died, you might first be in denial and refusing to accept that it's happened, and then you might be moving to anger. You're angry about your dog's death because maybe you're mad at the world or mad at the driver, or someone who couldn't save his life. Then you move to what's called bargaining. That's like trying to reform yourself to get your dog back. And then comes the stage of depression, where the reality of difficulty sinks in and you just feel like giving up. And finally, the last stage of grief is known as acceptance, where you accept the new reality. Now, here's the funny thing, since that was going on in the back of my mind. I noticed as I was teaching this course that these 5 stages actually model pretty closely the stages that people go through when they're learning Git. First, there was denial. People who start out with Git invariably imagine, well, I'm sure it's just exactly like or very similar to my old version control system. Version control is version control, right? I learned the other one before, and this one should be about the same. Of course, then they start using Git and they discover that it's completely different from the centralized version control system that they learned in the past. So then they move to anger. They get angry at Git for being so complicated because all the complexity seems so completely pointless to them. Why is it so complicated when all I want to do is check out some files and make some changes? Next, there's bargaining. They realize that Git really is complicated, and they try to figure out what the absolute minimum number of features are required for them to use. They might say, I'll just click pull when I want to develop, and then I'll click commit and push when I'm done. And hopefully that'll be enough so that I won't have to learn any of the rest of this Git stuff. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second because I think it's really important for you to know that bargaining, just learning a few features of Git, doesn't work. And there's at least 3 reasons why. First, if you limit yourself to just 1 or 2 features of Git, you won't be able to follow best practices. Instead, you and your team are going to be constantly making choices in order to avoid using the powerful aspects of Git, making Git a roadblock to your development rather than an enabler of your development. Second, I can promise you that at some point, you will need to use the so-called advanced features of Git. And that moment is very often going to occur in a crisis situation, like the night before a release. It's an embarrassing thing to be unable to release your code because you don't know how to use the version control tool. Third, and most importantly, it's nearly always the case that when a developer tries to learn just 1 or 2 features of Git, those Git features aren't actually doing the things that the developer thinks they're doing. So the developer's actually doing things to their code base that they're not even aware of, which is probably a bad thing. And when they get error messages from Git, they're in big trouble. Maybe they're even damaging or losing important work on the source code base. So bargaining, learning just 1 or 2 Git features, doesn't work. In fact, avoiding using some of Git's features will actually complicate the situation, and it'll get you into deeper trouble. In order to effectively use Git at all, you really kind of need to understand all of it fairly well. So, when people realize this, that bargaining doesn't work, they go into Git depression. They think that Git will frustrate their development efforts forever. Now, when developers actually get the opportunity to learn the tool, they wind up in the final stage, acceptance. But the difference between grief acceptance and Git acceptance is this. In the stages of grief, you just accept the bad news and move on. But in the final stage of learning Git, you actually realize that Git's a powerful development tool. You realize you can do things with it far beyond what your old centralized version control system was ever capable of, and you're really glad that you're using it. Now, when I'm teaching this class to a group of face-to-face participants, I always ask people in the class to identify where they are right now in the actual stages of Git. And people can always identify it. So as you start this course, ask yourself, in which of these 5 stages am I? Point at one of these faces on the slide deck and say, yep, I'm in Git bargaining right now, or I'm in the Git anger phase, or whatever. Now, you got it? You got where you are? The goal of this course is to get you as far to the right as possible, to get you all the way to acceptance. Now, if you've ever been on a team that uses Git, if you're lucky, there's one person that everyone knows to go to whenever they get into Git trouble. The goal of the course is for you to be that person. Even better, you can encourage everyone on your team to take this course so that everyone on the team will have mastered Git. There's basically 3 weeks to this course. This week, week 0, is just a series of short intro videos, and then the next 3 weeks are the real essence of the course. I'm asking you to plan to invest around 5 hours per week for just those 3 main weeks, and at the end, you'll really understand Git. I've come to believe that there's a simple reason that explains why many developers don't understand Git. They don't have an opportunity to experiment with it and test out its features. It's hard to experiment when your experiment risks messing up your team's development work. So, this course is going to be very hands-on. We software developers learn by experimentation. I've taken online classes before that were interesting, that you could just have playing in the background while you were doing something else. This course is not one of those courses. For most of the sessions, I'll be giving a technical demo, and for most of those technical demos, I will strongly encourage you to follow along with what I'm doing on your own. That way, the concepts won't be abstract or academic. You will understand and have experience with how to put them into practice. Each session will be followed by a quiz of 2 or 3 ungraded questions to help you test your knowledge, and each week will be concluded with a graded assignment, really a test, to check your progress. At the end, there will be a final. And I've carefully designed all the quiz and assignment and final exam questions to really test whether or not you've been able to grasp the material. I will give you all the tools you need to answer every single question, and I will walk you through all the concepts so that you can ace everything. Best of all, I've designed all the questions so that once you do ace them, you can have confidence that you have achieved Git mastery. And then you can not only be in that last phase of Git acceptance, you can actually help move your colleagues through the stages as well. Does that sound fun? I'm really excited to help you be the next developer to master Git. So join me in the next unit, and I will give you a more detailed overview of what we're going to cover in this course.